thank you all for joining Skystone Partners today for our November installment of On Giving, incisive commentary and analysis at the intersection of philanthropy and the greater good. I'm Liz Knuppel, President and CEO of Skystone Partners, where we believe philanthropy is a powerful force for good. I'm proud to welcome you attendees and our guests, Marybeth Gasman. Dr. Marybeth Gasman, would you like to come screen on? And Dr. Warmack, would you like to come screen on? Dr. Gasman is the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Endowed Chair in Education at Rutgers University. And Dr. Warmack is the 9th president of the U.S. News and World Report top-rated historically Black university, Claflin University. Hi there. Thank you all for joining us today. So today, Marybeth and Dwaun, we're going to be talking about the profound shift in the landscape of philanthropy at historically Black colleges and universities. And with this in mind, dear guests, I'd like to tell you about Drs. Gasman and Warmack. Now, one of the things that I remarked on to both of them before our session started was they're both so accomplished. I had a very difficult time editing their bios down and still doing their great accomplishments justice. So Marybeth, as I mentioned before, is the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Endowed Chair in Education, a distinguished professor and the Associate Dean for Research in the Graduate School of Education at Rutgers University. She also serves as the Executive Director of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Institute for Leadership and Equity and Justice, and the Executive Director of the Rutgers Center for Minority Serving Institutions. Marybeth is the Chair of the Rutgers University New Brunswick Faculty Council. Prior to joining faculty at Rutgers, Marybeth was the Judy and Howard Berkowitz Endowed Professor in Graduate School of Education at the University of Pennsylvania, and her areas of expertise include the history of American higher education, minority-serving institutions with an emphasis on historically Black colleges and universities, racism and diversity, fundraising and philanthropy, and higher education leadership. Marybeth is the author of 30 books, including Educating a Diverse Nation, Harvard University Press, Envisioning Black Colleges, Johns Hopkins University Press, Making Black Scientists, Harvard University Press, and her forthcoming book, Doing the Right Thing, How to End Systemic Racism in Faculty Hiring, Princeton University. And then lastly, I'd like to mention, I didn't have it today, Marybeth. This is one of my favorite books, A Guide to Fundraising at Historically Black Colleges and Universities, an all-campus approach. But she is also the 2005 AFP Skystone Partners Prize for Research winning author for Uplifting a People, African-American Philanthropy and Education. She is a prolific writer with 250 peer-reviewed articles, scholarly essays, and has penned over 450 opinions for the nation's newspapers and magazines, and is ranked by Education Week as one of the most influential education scholars in the nation. Marybeth has raised $23 million in grant funding to support her research and that of her students, mentees, and MSI partners. She served on the Board of Trustees of the College Board, as well as Historically Black Colleges, Paul Quinn College, Morris Brown College, and St. Augustine College. She considers her proudest accomplishment to be receiving the University of Pennsylvania's Provost Award for Distinguished PhD Teaching and Mentoring, serving as the dissertation chair for over 80 doctoral students since 2000. So thank you for coming, Marybeth. Now I'd like to introduce, absolutely, bravo. I'd like to introduce Dr. Warmack. Dr. Dwaun J. Warmack began his tenure as the 9th president of Claflin University on August 1st, 2019, joining the pantheon of distinguished leaders of the first historically Black college or university in South Carolina. Dr. Warmack was selected by Claflin University Board of Trustees based on his commitment to academic integration and the holistic development of students. And I've seen that firsthand, have to say. Full disclosure, Claflin University is a client of Skystone Partners. Dr. Warmack is committed to developing programs that promote diversity, pluralism, and cultural competency. And throughout his career, he's championed inclusion, academic excellence, and the retention of underrepresented students. Over the years, he's presented more than 120 diversity and leadership presentations and workshops to an array of individuals and groups. At Claflin University, Dr. Warmack remains committed to excellence and to moving the university forward to higher levels of national distinction and recognition. Prior to his current appointment, Dr. Warmack served as president of Harris-Stowe State University for 5 years. He's had more than 20 years of progressive administrative experience in higher education at 5 distinct institutions. And under his tenure, Harris-Stowe witnessed transformation unheralded in its 160-year history. Dr. Warmack shepherded more than $15 million in external funding to the institution, including a $5 million grant, the largest in the institution's history. We have more to say about Claflin and fundraising too shortly. As a visionary with a unique understanding and appreciation for today's Generation Z students, Dr. Warmack provides a brand of leadership that is characterized by an unqualified insistence on data-driven decision-making and a commitment to higher education's current best practice. To bolster his executive acumen, Dr. Warmack has participated in a variety of professional development opportunities. And in 2019, Dr. Warmack was selected and conducted global research as an Eisenhower Fellow. Dr. Warmack was named the Delta State University Black Alumnus of the Year and was inducted into the institution's Hall of Fame, along with many other awards and public recognition. One of the most intriguing to me is Who's Who in Color, Most Intriguing People, and 10 Most Dominant HBCU Leaders of 2018. Dr. Warmack has served on a wide array of boards and committees locally, regionally, and nationally. Dr. Warmack earned his bachelor's degree in education and a master's degree in sociology from Delta State University. He earned his doctorate in educational leadership with a specialization in higher education from Union University in Jackson, Tennessee, and his postdoctoral studies in educational leadership at Harvard University School of Education. As you can see, we have 2 of the most preeminent leaders in historically Black education in the room today with us to share their insights. So thank you all. Thank you. Before we begin our conversation, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. First, about format. Dr. Gasman and Dr. Warmack will take a couple of minutes to reflect on the trends they are seeing nationally and their own firsthand experiences. I've prepared a few questions for our discussion, and then we will have some general discussion and time for select questions from you before we wrap up our conversation. If you would like to add a question, please use the Q&A feature that's located at the bottom of your screen. The chat feature that you use to say hello in will be disabled from now on. So we'd like for you to use the Q&A feature. Our question moderator is Skystone Partners Senior Consultant, Adrienne Taylor, and she will be receiving your questions. She'll curate them behind the scenes, so we have the opportunity to answer as many as we can without duplicates. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, historically Black colleges and universities have been long-standing pinnacles of American higher education. These world-class institutions are currently experiencing a profound shift in the landscape of philanthropy. With the tragedy of George Floyd and the founding of the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as select megagifts from philanthropists around the country, attention and funds have been flowing toward minority-serving institutions and to HBCUs in particular. Marybeth, can you share some of the national trends in philanthropy with regards to HBCUs?
Sure, absolutely. And first of all, I want to say thanks for inviting me to participate. And I couldn't be happier than to be here with the president of Claflin University, because Claflin University, I always tell people this, is one of the very best universities in the nation. It's one of the best HBCUs, and it's also one of the very best universities among all colleges and universities, mainly because of its incredible attention to student success. And I think it's really hard to find an institution that cares as much about student success as Claflin. And I say that not just as hyperbole, because I do research, right? I'm not a president. I do research, and I did a research project that included Claflin, and so I can say that with a great deal of certainty. Great question. And one thing I was going to say is that HBCUs, and in this situation, I think we should talk about HBCUs. We can also talk about other MSIs, but HBCUs have been just doing incredible work throughout their entire history, right? And over 100 years of incredible work have built the African-American middle class in this country. And there is absolutely no way that you would have the success that African-Americans have without HBCUs. And it's interesting because prior to COVID and prior to this kind of burst of philanthropy and prior to the murder of George Floyd, you sort of had, you heard in the news a lot of CEOs of corporations and people who were hiring saying that they couldn't find African-American talent anywhere, right? They were having a really difficult time. And as that was said, and I'm sure that President Warmack was probably thinking something similar is, well, why aren't you looking at HBCUs, which have been producing this incredible African-American talent for so long? And in recent years, we've seen people like Kamala Harris or Stacey Abrams or a whole variety of very prominent African-American alumni take on these political roles. But one thing we've got to remember is that African-American alumni of HBCUs have been holding those political roles throughout history. That's nothing new. That's the norm for HBCUs, right? And it's just like, when people are all of a sudden, and sometimes I get a little frustrated with this, they're sort of discovering HBCUs as something of value when, and I started doing work related to HBCUs back in 1994 because I read an amazing book called, The Education of Blacks in the South by a Stillman grad, James Anderson. And I was just like, wait a minute here, these are the most powerful institutions in the nation. These are incredibly powerful institutions in terms of their contributions. So we've got like this sort of like renaissance or new discovery of HBCUs that's producing talent, but that's been going on all along. And so what's kind of happened recently is, of course, Mackenzie Scott's donation of $560 million to HBCUs, I think lends a certain cachet to HBCUs that now people who might have been a little hesitant about giving money in the past are all of a sudden like, well, if Mackenzie Scott can give money, maybe we'll give money. And so, and that's how money works. I mean, I've got a bunch of philanthropists and, people who are familiar with philanthropy and fundraising. Money begets money, right? So if you can get a couple of people to give, then you can get more people to give. So you've seen like this influx of money. At the same time, you've seen I've seen an enormous amount of corporate partnerships that I did not see before. Of course, they've always existed, but people are just scrambling to partner with HBCUs now. And I hope that HBCUs are picking the ones that they want to partner with and letting the other ones go to the wayside because, their HBCUs have a lot to offer and they shouldn't be looked upon as, for a long time, I felt people looked at HBCUs as, oh, we're helping them. Well, no, they're helping you, so I think that's really important to keep in mind. And then, I'm very excited about this time. I hope it continues. I'm excited because I see more HBCU presidents and leaders speaking out on issues even more than in the past, because they always have. I see more people taking ownership of where HBCUs are going. And that's really, really important. Crafting partnerships that are good for HBCUs, not just good for the partner, but good for HBCUs. And also being really direct in what they need, talking about wanting an investment rather than just a donation, right? Mm-hmm. So those are things that I and again, I'm a researcher. I mean, President Warmack is a leader in this space. I do research. I lead in other ways, but I just want to say that I'm looking at it from the outside. even though I'm on boards of trustees, I'm not in the trenches working like he is, every day. That's not where my vantage point is. So, so that's what I see.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Marybeth. And so I'd like to turn things over to you, Dr. Warmack. It's interesting to hear Marybeth say, presidents are speaking out more, people are taking more ownership, there are more really good partnerships for HBCUs, and HBCUs are being more direct about what they need and asking for investment. What are you seeing? And certainly as a recipient of one of the first rounds of the McKinsey Scott Giving, what are you seeing boots on the ground with groundbreaking partnerships, changing in development and things like that? What are you experiencing at Claflin?
Thanks, Liz, again, and thank you for allowing me to be here, to be on a panel with the icon, Marybeth, right, who is one who has done remarkable work. And again, this transformation and the manifestation of greatness doesn't happen in our space without the right allies and people who are at the table to speak for the transformation of work when we're not at the table. Marybeth has done that for a very long time. So I remain thankful and grateful for your advocacy, your truth-telling, and your ability to be able to share the work that is happening at our HBCUs. I think, again, as Marybeth clearly articulated, HBCUs are not new, right? They've been doing this transformational work for a very long time. Have built the African-American middle class. The data clearly speaks for itself. When you think about represent less than 3% of colleges and universities in the United States, enroll roughly 12% of African-American students, but produce 23% of the African-American graduates. And so if I'm in any business, if I can get that type of ROI, we convert 40% of the all African-Americans with STEM degrees, 60% of the engineers. So if you're thinking about a type of return on your investment, what better place would it be to be at an HBCU because of the proven work that is there? And UNCF put out a document recent about punching above our weight. And again, when you think 50% of African-American teachers, 40% of African-American health professionals, 70% of dentists, all and physicians come from HBCUs, but only make up 3% of the colleges and universities in the country and only enroll 12%, but is having 7% of these folks that are in STEM professions to be able to do that. So it just thinks about with limited investment, limited funds that are in there and doing this type of transformational work. So HBCUs have been leading the way for a very long time, right? So it's not, but we're not monolithic either, right? That's what makes us different. There's 100 HBCUs that have unique missions. And so some are research intensive, and a few of my colleagues are going to be R1s right now, like Morgan State and North Carolina A&T, which rightfully so deserves it, right? You have some who have strong liberal arts focus, like a Claflin University, who's unapologetic about the student experience and the teaching and learning, and our major focus on student success and making sure our majors continue to be a place where a student, they are here to not just recruit them, graduate them, but to get them gainfully employed and to change their family trajectory forever. And so I think our conversations as it relates to philanthropy is developing the right mutually beneficial partnerships. All partnerships are not good partnerships. And so finding partnerships that are mutually beneficial that can help this company, corporation, entity be successful, because we're not looking for handouts, right? That's the piece about it. We're doing remarkable transformational work. And folks, I want to diversify my workforce. I was talking to someone about that recently here in the state of South Carolina. And I said, oh, where are you recruiting? Oh, we've gone to Bob Jones. We've gone to, well, you're not really looking for a diverse workforce, right? And so here's a place where you can come get this talent, that's proven talent, to be able to do it. And so cultivating the relationships with the right entities to ensure that our students are able to get the experiences that's needed, but there's also too the investment. A lot of these companies spend a significant amount of dollars in diversity recruitment budgets. And so, but you're not filling, and all of them say they're still not be able to fill their diversity needs. Well, go to our HBCUs, you can be able to find that talent. It will save your funds significantly. And so that's been our strategy. And part of it is our HBCUs, we have to save ourselves too, right? We can't expect other folks to invest in us if we don't invest in ourselves. And so hats off to Claflin University, our alumni giving. Our alumni giving has been for 13, 14 consecutive years, over 40% of our alumni, over 40% of alumni giving, which is just transformational. But it goes to talk about their experience here on the Hilltop High as visionary leaders here at Claflin University, and then go out to the world to be able to do it. So when we go out to corporations and companies, they see we're investing in ourselves. And again, with the right partners like Skystone Partners, that's helping us ensure our strategies are in the right place. to be able to move the needle that is there. And so again, I'm excited that in a 3.5 years, it's not reflected in a bio. We've raised over 50 million in 3.5 years. So, and again, we're just warming up. And so we're in a place where, and again, because it's a value proposition, right? It's a fundraising is an art and a science. And so understanding and how those two pieces work together, and our team is working collectively to ensure that again, putting forth the work. And that's a lot. And I say 52 million, which again, it's pennies in the grand scheme of things. You look at a place like Harvard, and look at their 50, I don't know what it is today. I don't know how the market is, 53 billion endowment, right? Mm-hmm. You go to our HBCU, the largest endowment with Howard, less than 700 million, and so just thinking about context of what happens there. And so when people say, oh, Morehouse got this money, Spelman got it, I celebrate it, right? They deserve it, right? Because they have been underfunded, under-resourced for a very long time. And so I think there's enough to go around for all of us to be successful.
Excellent. Excellent. So you're seeing transformational partnerships. And I think I can attest to this as well. When I hear every other day a new corporation that has an interest in how you're, moving conversations forward with effective internships, and those can turn into jobs for Claflin graduates and the like. And having history myself, the firm having history with Claflin University, the kinds of partnerships, the diversity, the depth, the number of partnership opportunities that are coming your way are really, really tremendous. And there's an opportunity here, and this is about you all today, but the opportunity here, I think, for other historically Black colleges and universities is to be very thoughtful about building those relationships. And what does that look like? It's not just an internship opportunity. Is it philanthropy and sponsorship and how can we as a institution, and I think Dr. Warmack, the way that you approach education kind of is similar to how you're approaching your internship programs. I'd like for you to maybe talk about this a little bit further, but it's very holistic. It's campus wide, right? And it really echoes what Marybeth, again, my favorite book, Guide to Fundraising at Historically Black Colleges and Universities, an all-campus approach. The way that you think about your internships and philanthropy is more than just in sort of a single siloed kind of a way. And I'd love to hear a little bit about how you think about that, because you've been, from my observation, really quite successful with this tidal wave of interest.
Well, I think, listen, what I fundamentally believe that we have a talent source that can transform America here at our HBCUs, right? But also believe talent's not free either, right? And so we invest in what we want to invest in. So when I have conversations with companies and corporations, I said, hey, yeah, you want my talent? Well, here's how you have to invest. And you have to invest on the front end to get your ROI on the back end. So if you want my talent, a local company here, and would say, hey, I reached out to one of my colleagues here in the state, and I said, hey, let's put together this proposal to this company. We want to ask for nothing less than $3 million, $5 million, right? And we could guarantee a guaranteed internship for all of our students. So we're able to recruit students that guarantee an intern with this company. They have zero debt graduating from the institution in 4 years and guaranteeing employment with this company. So the company funds those scholarships on the front end where the institution get real cash in, right? So there's real cash in. And so there's not a funding of a debt for our students. Students graduate with zero debt, guaranteed a job. The company feels this diverse workforce. Claflin brings real cash in to be able to get those students to and through the finish line, and everyone benefits, right? Yep. And so it's not a handout, it's a benefit. And so as we've been able to do that with multiple major companies, that has led to a significant amount of dollars in institutional funds for them to be able to do that.
Absolutely, holistically across the campus. And Marybeth, I'm curious about your perspective on these as well. But one of the things that I want to point out, Dr. Warmack, in research that I've done and serving a number of historically Black colleges over the years, African-American students historically have graduated with disproportionate amounts of debt because, of course, there isn't the long-term family wealth building, perhaps not as much education about how student loans can and should be used. So what you're doing right here is, again, investing in student success through scholarship, through philanthropy, through partnerships and internships and the like. And it really does take this whole campus approach that includes philanthropy. And Marybeth, I want to turn it over to you real quick and get your thoughts on these particularly corporate partnerships and as they relate to philanthropy to institutions. And yeah.
Sure. So a couple things. One, I think it was back in about 2010, I had written an article about, it was a historical piece about the inequities in corporate and foundation philanthropy toward HBCUs. And one of the things that I did is I looked back at the corporate and foundation contributions to HBCUs throughout history. And one of the things that I found is that when corporations and foundations would give to HBCUs, they would give a small amount, and then they'd go across the street to the majority institution and give a really large gift. And when I used historical data to look at this and historical interviews and or oral history interviews. And one of the things that I found is that they didn't trust HBCU leaders to handle the money. And of course, that is something that has happened in a whole variety of contexts throughout history. And so one of the things that I say to people, and I'm just going to be really frank here, okay? So I'm a contributing writer for Forbes, and people are pitching things at me 24/7 because they found out I write about HBCUs a lot, okay? And so a lot of times it's corporations that are pitching things, hey, would you write about this partnership? And it's interesting because the only ones I'll write about are the big ones. Because people will tell me, oh, we're giving $10,000 to an HBCU. Really? I mean, come on. I mean, and it's some huge organization. And I'll say, I just will write back and say, I think it's great that you're starting to support HBCUs, but I've noticed that you've been supporting all these other institutions with really large, substantial donations. And so if you can come to me with a donation to an HBCU that's similar, I might write about it. But when you're only giving HBCUs 10,000 and you're giving multi-million-dollar grants and things to other institutions right across the street, I'm just not going to do that. And then the other thing is, a lot of times people will reach out to me and they'll say, hey, we need an HBCU partner for a grant or for a project because they won't qualify without one, right? And I always say to them, well, first of all, you should be creating, if you want to do something, you do it in partnership with the HBCU, not you pull the HBCU in at the last minute, give them $25,000 and just to get their name on it. You're laughing because you know how often this happens, right? Exactly. And so It's just crazy. And so a couple of times recently, I've said to people, I'm like, I'll just point blank ask, how much money are you going to give to the HBCU? And when they tell me, I'm like, no, that's not enough. You need to be fairly giving funding to HBCUs. They need it more than you might even need it. And so I think that for me, the best partnerships are ones that happen together as people move forward together, not kind of an HBCU add-in at the 23rd hour before the grant is due or before the idea comes to fruition. I also think that you have to be equitable in these partnerships. So and I don't think that's the way it's been for a long time. I think people are getting the message now because many HBCUs are saying no. They're saying, no, we don't want a partnership with you because it's not an equitable partnership. There have been times where HBCUs didn't have the luxury of doing that, whereas a lot of PWIs can. I don't know if you all remember, but Yale gave back $10 million one time, okay, to the Bass family because they tried to dictate the curriculum, so they gave back $10 million. That's a lot harder to do as an HBCU, but HBCUs are getting, I think, a little bit more savvy about not wanting to realizing that they're getting the short end of the stick in some of these situations and they're not willing to take it. I mean, I've really enjoyed watching some of these HBCU presidents speak up about this and push back pretty hard. I think that's a good thing. I think it's good that we have equitable partnerships. Sorry to get a little feisty there, but that's a topic that gets under my skin. So
Hey, Liz, can I give a little bit on that? I mean, you almost had me jump out of my seat. I was just fired up. I mean, because you're 100% correct. And I think, as I stated earlier, all partnerships are not good partnerships. And I think that's why it's so important for HBCUs to build capacity. And so we are at a place as Claflin University, we've turned down more partnerships than we've agreed to because they didn't make fiscal sense. You can't give me pennies and you're bringing in millions and think. And so what we've done is build our capacity for writing our own. So it just came out, the $20 million to the state of South Carolina. And so we're the lead. When I met with the Department of Energy and met with environmental management, and I talked to them, and it started with a Claflin $3.5 million. And I said, hey, we have the capacity in the state of South Carolina to create this consortium. If you can bring all HBCUs in and if everybody get a piece of it. And so from the smallest HBCU, get up to $1 million, right? And so a $20 million gift, well, we didn't have to partner with a large research institution. We are the lead in that space. Right. And now this 20 million can become 50 million because we show our capacity and our ability to be able to manage that. But again, hats off to a person like Mackenzie Scott, who showed philanthropy can be done differently. You have the ability to be able to give unrestricted gifts. And our report, it's more than a paragraph, her team is upset. Where these other organizations and entities, they give you $10,000, you have to do a 30-page report every 2 weeks. And again, you're reporting more than you can do anything with the work. And so some of those funds are just not worth even going after. And so she was able to show, first, let me show I trust you, HBCUs. You know better than anything else what the funds are needed for. And it couldn't come at a more interesting time in the middle of a global pandemic and all of those pieces that were there. And so it's being able to show that HBCUs have been good shepherds. And out of anyone, you should know that if this school has been, these institutions for over 100 years have been able to do more with less for a significant amount of time, imagine if they had more resources, what can happen. And so we're fortunate to be in that space, that we are a lead in a lot of these entities and being able to create the partnerships with these departments who have been also too, not just from a corporate philanthropy standpoint, a lot of the national departments as well have been isolating subconsciously or consciously HBCUs in a lot of that space. The way the call for proposals are written, there's no way you can even compete in the marketplace because of some of the facilities, some of the requirements that are there. And so being able to advocate and push those conversations to be able to be at the table, because if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. And too oftentimes we end up on that menu because we're not at the table.
That's right. That's right. And so with this sort of influx of new corporate partnerships and we'll just use Mackenzie Scott as a preeminent example. There's been a lot of new resources to Claflin and to other historically Black institutions and minority serving institutions. What have you seen? How's that reception been by your tried and true long-term stakeholders? I'm curious about national trends, Marybeth, but Dr. Warmack, that means that things are different. Things are different. How does that change affect faculty, staff, students, board members, the administration?
I think the paradigm shift has to happen sometimes when you've operated and I'm saying in general, a lot of HBCUs because of the underfunded, under-resourced, and this whole ideology of, oh, Claflin has 20 million, they don't need anymore, right? Mm-hmm. Like, oh, they're rolling in the dough for just some of your constituents. Where at a place like Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Princeton, that is celebrated, and their constituent groups see that as an opportunity to give more, right? And so really getting that shift to understand that hey, oh, they don't need any more. I mean, because I'm in conversations with, well, Claflin has all of the money. Actually, I wish we did, right? We don't have it. We have a long way to go. And so shifting that paradigm of understanding that it's okay to have an abundance. Right? And we've earned that to be able to do it, and our students deserve it, right? I think, and our constituents. But again, our faculty and our staff are committed. We are I guess I'm okay to say this, Liz, we're in the early stages of a capital campaign. We're not in public yet with it, but at the same time, our campus community, our board commitment, 100% board commitment in this phase. And we're now in the inter-family phase of it. And our faculty and staff are excited about the work. Our students are excited. I know our alumni will be on board. And so we want to continue to show that whoever we work with as it relates to philanthropy, that we're good shepherds over the funds that are there as well. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically it's paradigm shift and people are do you feel like people are beginning to get more comfortable with it's okay to have an abundance?
So, yeah, I mean, when you think when our endowment in 2019, when I arrived, was roughly about 21 million.
Yeah.
And at the peak before this market crash, we were right at 60 million. And so we were able to increase that endowment that significantly in a 3-year span.
Right.
And so there's no reason why we shouldn't be at $150 million endowment.
Right.
So we continue to build out and folks to be able to see that that their funds are in fertile ground, and it makes it worth it. So I think our constituents are beginning to see that. They're seeing the brick and mortar coming up. They're seeing that their investments are going into quality places. So there are folks who are listening and would like to invest in Claflin University. Feel free. We have a lot of amazing projects to for you to invest in. So
absolutely. Marybeth, did you have some thoughts on that as well as it relates to sort of the paradigm shift and how people are responding?
Sure. I mean, a couple things I would say are that, I mean, it's really long overdue that HBCUs are getting this kind of money. I mean, there's just been so many decades of inequity in terms of the support of HBCUs, both state support, if they're state affiliated, federal support, and private support. I mean, it's just been long overdue. And the other thing I would say is that, you know, one thing I think that and I'm assuming that President Warmack is thinking about this maybe too, is that when you get this influx of money, people start to watch what you do with the money, right? And they start to ask a lot of questions. And I know, for example, I've been called by a number of news outlets that have said, well, we're tracking what HBCUs are doing with the money. And I thought that was so interesting, because how often are predominantly white institutions tracked with what they're doing with philanthropic funding, right? And I just thought, well, that's interesting to hold HBCUs to a completely different standard in terms of the way that we think about them. But I've been called by at least 4 different reporters around the country thinking about, well, you know, they got all this money, so we're going to see what they're going to do, almost as if they were holding HBCUs accountable. And I just thought to myself, I just wonder how often we're holding other institutions accountable. And I can tell you the answer to that: never. So I mean, for me, I think it's really important that we don't sort of treat people like, oh, we're going to give you this money, but now we're going to, like, you know, be like a helicopter parent over you, because, you know, we tend to do that as a nation to people of color in general. We tend to think, well, if we're going to give to nonprofits that work with people of color, we're going to need, as President Warmack just said, for, you know, $25,000, he's doing these reports that take more time than the actual work. And sometimes I think that's a really hard position to be put in. And that is one of the reasons why I think Mackenzie Scott is such a good example. And I know she doesn't like the light shined on her. She prefers that it not be, but what a tremendous example. And as was said earlier, of trusting people to do the work that they were hired to do, of trusting people who have a better track record, especially with African-American education, serving low-income students, serving first-gen students, serving like a whole diverse group of students, because HBCUs in particular are incredibly diverse. Why not trust them, right? Why not trust them? Why hover over to make sure that they're doing things properly? I mean, that rubs me the wrong way. And so that's what I was thinking when you were talking, is that there's all kinds of good things, but we also have to make sure not to sort of mistreat HBCUs or hold them to a different standard in the midst of all of these contributions.
Right. Absolutely. Now, I want to make sure that we get our attendees questions along the way, that we have an opportunity to answer those. So there's one more thing. I have so many questions, and the conversation has been so interesting and so thought-provoking for me. One of the things that, you know, you and I have talked about, Dr. Warmack and Marybeth, I'm sure it's on the minds of the institutions that you're researching and working with as well, is we saw this great influx during COVID-19, immediately following George Floyd's murder. The country was more aware, right? And more people were recognizing their place of privilege as a white person, how I can serve as an advocate. And there's been a lot of this hasn't been what either one of you have said, but guilt giving, right? You know, we're going to give, we're going to make it all better. But it's important to keep those relationships. And I think you both hit on this early, hit on those relationships are so critical. Those mutually beneficial relationships are so critical. But what is on my mind, and this is something that we're working with a number of minority serving institutions, is what does the modern minority serving institution need to do to keep the interest peaked and the dollars flowing? And it's all about relationships, but I think both of you probably have a pretty interesting and unique perspective. And Adrian is going to come camera on in just a second for audience Q&A, but let's wrap up this piece of the Q&A with that question. Who'd like to go first?
I mean,
go ahead, Marybeth, you fine, go ahead.
okay, I was just gonna say, I'm just gonna say three things, right? Number one, tell the institution's story in every place you can, everywhere you can, virtually, in person, to everyone, you know, just to everyone. That is so important. Grab hold of that narrative and tell that story. The second thing would be, whatever you commit to doing with these philanthropists, follow up on it. You know, I learned a long time ago from a woman named Tina Gridiron Smith. She worked at the Lumina Foundation, and she once said to me in front of a whole bunch of people, you know, Marybeth, the number one thing you're good at is managing up. And I didn't even know what managing up was, okay? But I found out it's making sure that the people that you are, you know, reporting to or you have an obligation to because of some kind of commitment, know what is going on. Don't let them be surprised. Make sure they always know. And I always tell people in the philanthropy world, manage up, you know, make sure that people know, because if they know you're doing good, they will keep investing in you. And then the last thing I would say is, insert yourself in national conversations. Like when you see something that is becoming really important nationally, as a leader of an MSI, insert yourself in that conversation. Even if you have to do it by writing an op-ed, insert yourself in there and get yourself on, you know, get people talking about how you have a perspective on that, because it will attract funders to you. So those are some of the strategies that I think about. There are many, many others, but I don't want to talk any longer. So, yeah.
How about you, Dr. Warmack?
Yeah, I agree. I think Liz, we've talked about this a lot, of telling your story before someone else does, right? I think HBCUs have a remarkable story, and it's imperative that we're able to tell the story and tell the right narrative. And a lot of times we miss that opportunity of telling our story, and other folks are creating this narrative that it's counterproductive to the work that we do. But I think also too, as I stated, be a good shepherd over the funds, right? You know, and so for us, Marybeth, I love when folks say, hey, we're tracking the work that is happening with the philanthropy. I said, well, good you are, because I'm not, right? You know, we're laser focused on student success all the time, not for a philanthropy dollar, right? We don't do it because of the dollars you invest in us. We believe in student success as a matrix. Now you want to look at it at a model institution, look at a school with an 80% retention rate, a high graduation rate, a 4% cohort default rate for student loans. And we've done that without your resources. So we will continue to do that and be even better. So you can't show me a student success matrix that is better. And so if that's what you're looking at as a measuring stick, please look at us, right? Because we're doing this in spite of, not because of the philanthropy. We're doing this because our students and our institution deserves that, and continue to be able to have that model. And our team has been laser focused. We don't go after philanthropy for the sake of philanthropy. It has to align with our mission. It has to align with our strategic values. If it doesn't, then, you know, it's not good for us as an institution. And so again, so we don't have to recreate the wheel like, oh, what are they doing around student success? Well, you've seen that. We continue that focus. What are they doing around overall? And so continue to let that be our focus, and not chasing the dollar, but ensuring that our student overall success is in a holistic development of the student. That's academically, that's personally, that's socially, and for Claflin, that's spiritually, and being unapologetic about that mission. And that's why we're laser focused. We don't have football, we don't have band, we don't have those ancillary things that folks typically see and celebrate in HBCU space. What we celebrate is a high academic institution that it is focused on student success matrix. And again, we align with philanthropy that makes sense in that space.
That's right.
To do that.
Thank you. Right on. Yeah. Excellent. My colleague, Adrian Taylor, who is a senior consultant with Skystone Partners, has popped out from behind the curtain. Adrian is moderating our questions and answers today. And Adrian, what are some of the burning questions that folks have on their mind for Marybeth and Dwaun?
Thank you for kicking it over. And I just want to say I was behind the curtain, amening and clapping to all the goodness that was dropped today. And I appreciate the transparency and the honesty from both of you. I have a couple of questions because actually the last question that Liz asked was one of the questions. So great segue, and great minds think alike. Marybeth, you touched on this a little bit already, but what barriers, and Dr. Warmack, you can chime in on this as well, still exist in this space? I heard Marybeth talk about accountability and kind of the inequities that we see and how we hold HBCUs and PWI accountable for certain things. What other barriers are you still seeing in this space for philanthropy?
Well, one of the largest barriers for most HBCUs, not all, but most, has to do with infrastructure in the fundraising area. I mean, PWIs have, in general, not all of them, but have, in many cases, tremendously deep, well built out infrastructures in fundraising. They might have for a school what an HBCU has for the entire institution, right? There are inequities in that area. This is an area that over the years, I've talked to so many funders about, just saying, if you would invest in the infrastructure of HBCUs, in the fundraising infrastructure, and build that out, it would change the opportunities for HBCUs in so many ways. It would just help immensely. I've also said that because I've testified before Congress a few times, and they always ask, where should we put money? And I always say every single time, why don't you take some money and put it in the infrastructure for fundraising? And also I would say grant procurement as well. Because what's happened is that you have a situation where predominantly white institutions are so far ahead in those areas because of, again, it's systemic inequities, right? Which that's the same as systemic racism. And so you have that going on for so long that, HBCUs are behind the 8 ball. Now, one thing that President Warmack said was, we've been doing it even without your help, right? And that is the truth. That is truth. I was once in a meeting with Janetta Cole, who, is the famed president of Spelman and also Bennett College for Women. And she said, yeah, we do more with less, but I'd like to do more with more, right? She's like, I'm tired of it, right? Yes. And I just thought, yes, right? And so I think that area, I would love, and I know the Kresge Foundation did an initial initiative around that, and it really helped some of the institutions, a small number, but I think around 7. But basically, that kind of infrastructure building, I would love to see that. I would love to see somebody, a philanthropist, just build out every single fundraising operation within HBCUs and also for grants. I think that's the way you get people ahead. And that's where you level some of these inequities. And I'd really like to see that happen. So.
Dr. Warmack, do you have anything to add to that?
No, Marybeth is spot on. And I think, Claflin was an early recipient years ago, 15 years ago, to build out our infrastructure. And it's allowed us to continue to scale and be able to do some of that work. And again, we're a living witness of that investment and what it's allowed us to do as an institution to be successful. But I think other piece, some of the areas of the inequities is when the lights were on, everyone was giving, right? So when a George Floyd situation happened, cameras rolling, everybody made these large pledges. And the question is, where is it now, right? Is it still in pledge form, or has it manifest to the entities that they said they were going to give it to? And so I think that's where that accountability, just as to the folks who are receiving the funding, but these funders who said they were going to do these things, who's going to make sure they hold them accountable to ensure that they're fulfilling that end, because everybody had $1 billion commitment to something with diversity, right? And so the question is, those dollars hadn't been circulated, so where are those funds now? And so who holds that single point of accountability to some of those entities? Because the cameras are not on anymore, right? There's no more sort of this subconscious pressure of doing the quote right thing as it relates to the population. So unfortunately, it has to have another situation, incident like that, for that to be able to happen. But it is my hope that some of these companies, corporations that's made these pledges to these entities will fulfill those promises that they put out there.
Absolutely. Do we have time for one more?
I think we absolutely. I know that we're starting to, but yes.
So let's look 5 years out. And from each of you, I would like to hear, what is a vision statement or that future statement that we can say about HBCUs and the piece of the pie that they have in philanthropy, or the space that they occupy within philanthropy? What do each of you hope to be able to say 5 years from now?
Well, that's tough because I'm in the now, right? I want mine right now. And again, I think, because what I don't want us to lose perspective of the remarkable work that HBCUs have done and have earned to be able to get investment in, but that has been underfunded, under-resourced for so many years, and intentionally, right? And so because you can't really move the needle without those resources. So you'll say, hey, we want to see quality student success matrix, and I'm just going to use some HBCUs. So you'll say you have a public state institution that is mandated by the mission to say that you are an open enrollment institution, okay? And open enrollment, you're serving these first generation kids who are not college ready, but then you're in a state that has performance funding matrix that you have to have a certain threshold of success rates and graduation rates. But there's no way you can possibly do that because you don't have the investment to remediate these kids that are there. Philanthropy is not funding that. So you're underfunded through the state. Then you're underfunded when people look at your general matrix and say, hey, we can't fund this place. It's a hellhole. They're failing. They don't have high graduation rates, don't have high retention rates. So it's a systematic structural piece that was put into, I can't even call it implicit bias, right? It's intentional. These states do that to be able to have the lack of success and say, oh, well, maybe we don't need HBCUs no more. Maybe we should merge. Is there still a need for the HBCUs? Well, yeah. So if you create these structures intentionally, you can't have the success. And so most funders want to look at these student success matrix. That's one of the first things they look at, right? And so I'm fortunate to be at an institution that's done it well. So when you look at US News Report, we're consistently in there, but there's a lot of HBCUs that is doing cutting edge work, but who don't fall into that same category because of these other systematic pieces that's caused them to be in a very compromising situation. So I think, we look at this more from an equity lens when we begin to think about philanthropy in the next 5 years, and how we look at, you can't separate the intentional racism that's happening in this country and the equity around funding that comes behind that as well, right? And so being able to ensure those two in the next 5 years are not looked at as an either or, but a both and.
Love that.
I'm gonna say the 5-year thing, but I want to co-sign what President Warmack said, because it's a setup, okay? And that's what it is, a setup. And if you want to know about HBCUs, and just the systemic inequities that these institutions have faced, there are two books that I would read. One of them is The State Must Provide by Adam Harris, which came out last year, and talks about the public funding of HBCUs and exactly what was just talked about, right? This whole idea of setting people up for failure and then expecting them to not fail, right? And that's exactly what you see. Now, what's interesting is that HBCUs have not failed. So just imagine that.
Yep.
And then the other, so just imagine that. Imagine where HBCUs would be if they weren't set up in a way to try to make them fail. And then the other book, and this is an older book, but I just think this is such a great book. I'm hoping some of you have read it, and that is The Color of Wealth, which is the story behind the U.S. racial wealth divide. That's such an important book if you care about philanthropy, if you care about fundraising, and if you care about issues of race in the nation. And it's not about HBCUs, but it crosses over and gets you to really understand for public and private HBCUs where these wealth disparities exist. So what for me for 5 years, you know what would be great? I read yesterday that I think that Jeff Bezos said he was going to give away all his money. And I would love for him just to give a huge amount to HBCUs and just build up their infrastructure, give them huge endowments, and then let's just see what goes on. Because he did announce that yesterday. He gave Dolly Parton a whole bunch of money, and at the same time, and that, that's a good gift because she does great things with her money. But, and then at the same time, he said, I'm going to give away my money, right? I'm going to give away my money. I hope that he looks to HBCUs, rounds out their endowments, builds them up, builds up their fundraising infrastructure. And I'm just putting that out in the universe so that it might happen. That's why I'm putting it out there. I'm putting it out there. And, I just want HBCUs to thrive because I think they do some of the very best work in the nation, work that many other institutions don't spend enough time doing. So that's what I think.
Marybeth, I'm touching and agreeing with you right there when you put that in the atmosphere that he will do that. And again, as a man of faith, again, it says when two or more gather, he's in the midst. So I'm touching and agreeing that he will say that.
Yes.
Amen.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Me too. That's why I put it out there. Just
Receive it. I am touching and agreeing with you.
I love it. I love it. Adrian, we have another question, and Marybeth and Dr. Warmack, we are running out of time. Dr. Warmack, this is homecoming week, and I know what that means on your campus. Marybeth, I know you have another engagement to have another conversation similar to this in just a few minutes. Shall we endeavor to try to answer this last question? It's one that deserves maybe more time than we have right now.
I'm okay staying for a second.
Okay. Adrian, do you want to go ahead?
Absolutely. Question is, many companies are looking to partner with HBCUs lately. However, many of these companies give restricted funds that must be used for specific projects. What can we do to get companies to give to HBCU endowment funds?
What I would say, some of those companies, you write the structure. Every one of our partnerships, we've created the structure where we wanted the funds to go. And so when we write our proposal, we're laser focused. So we'll see the historic charitable giving and see what they've done. But we also to structure our sort of acts in a way that it's what we want it for, right? Not for what sort of they want it for. I'll give a shameless plug too, and I know this may put them Google again, because we've given Mackenzie Scott a lot of love, but I'll use Google with the 50 million that they gave to about 10 HBCUs and 100% unrestricted. 100% unrestricted with the dollars that were given. And I use Melody Parker, shout out to Melody, who's HBCU graduate, Chief Diversity Officer, who got it. When we were meeting with her, the 10 of us HBCU presidents, and was like, and when they said the exact same thing, it was a very prescriptive piece of what happens with that. And we were like, you don't need to tell us what to do with the funds. We know what to do with them. And she went back to her CEO and they came back unrestricted dollars to be able to do it. So it's okay sometimes to push back, right? And at that point, I use Ruth Simmons, who were like, you know, if I was sitting at the table with my colleagues at Yale, Princeton, it'll be an insult for you to come in here and tell me that you want to give this. So how do you think it's okay for you to come in here and tell my colleagues and I to be able to do that? And so I'm sitting there, okay, Ruth, I'm right with you. I got your back, right? And it makes a difference. And so sometimes it's okay to push back. And for them, Google didn't see it as they just didn't think about it. That's how philanthropy had been done for so long. And so they had allowed the opportunity to be able to make it unrestricted. So being willing to go to these corporations or companies and present what your need base is for that. And again, given towards endowment, I think that's a different conversation. You have to find what those entities are to be able to do that. And again, and part of what happens is conversation around endowment has to be a lot more intentional, right? Because when you go to a philanthropy, you go to someone who gives, you're like, okay, what does endowment mean, right? So what are you doing with endowment? So how much of the percentage of this endowment you're using for scholarships? How much are you using for quote operational? And so it just can't be say, I want to build my endowment. You want to build your endowment to do what? And so having the right strategies and the right partners like Skystone Partners there to help you really think through those strategies for if it happens. Oh, I just want my endowment to be 20 million. What does that mean, right? What is that impact on your institutional long-term strategy? And what does that mean for that as well? So that's example, you know, when you say, oh, I have these presidential scholarships. Well, if you're a $26,000 price tag, you do 10 scholarships a year to be able to endow those, then that's a different conversation. You're not, and so being able to have strategic acts and acting for a purpose and being able to structure those in a certain way. That's for free. Charge a consultant fee for that, but that's for free.
Thank you. We love working with you all. We really do. Oh, I have a lot of love for Claflin University. I've had the opportunity to work with you all since before Dr. Warmack, and I hope we continue to, well, I hope you never leave.
No, Liz, you have been, and again, I meant that, I mean, you've helped us really continue to think about the work holistically. And so again, having the right partners and to help to be able to understand what that looks like. So I'm sorry, Marybeth, I talked a lot.
You know what? I think you said everything that needed to be said. I loved it. I loved it all. So I'm good.
Thank you. Well, thank you all today. Thank you, Adrian, for being our question moderator. Marybeth and Dwaun, you have been such lively, inspiring guests today. I always write comments. I'm not going to even read my comments about what we learned about. Thank you so much for coming and bringing your perspectives on the current trends in philanthropy in minority serving institutions and in HBCUs. I love hearing about the successes. I love giving you all the platform to be able to talk about it and give others your insights as well. So thank you so much. And I know it's a big day for you, Marybeth. It's a big week for you, Dr. Warmack. And I'm just grateful that you could be here with us today. Guests, if you enjoyed today's conversation, we'll be sending out a replay as well as links to some of the books and some of the resources that were mentioned throughout our conversation today. And I hope that you will join us on our next On Giving, where we will be talking about governance and its effect on philanthropy with Penelope Cagney from the Cagney Group, John Stettner, the former CEO of the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and Simona Bianco, who is with Engage In, which is one of the most preeminent governance consulting firms in Europe. So we'll be talking with them in December. Hope you all will come again. Marybeth, thank you so much. Dr. Warmack, thank you so much. Adrian, thanks for a great job with the question moderating. And everybody should, raise the roof for Executive Assistant Sam Martin, because he's in charge of technology and made sure everything happened the way it needed to. Thank you. Go forth, do good work. Philanthropy is a powerful force for good.